Hey everybody, welcome back to Low Friction Friday. Sorry I missed last week, and I'm starting this one today with obviously the intention to finish it and upload, but fairly under the pump. We'll see how we go. But I've picked a topic that I can just sort of quickly wing it, I think, as we go and get one final fun chat in before I zoom off, because then, I'll be out of this space for a fair bit of time. I'm going to try to clock off pretty early next week to get last minute bits done. Then I'll be, US for 3 weeks with Mini-Me. And then it'll be at least a week when I'm back to catch up on a whole bunch of backlog before I can even start to think about getting the next sort of proper low friction video done. So this will be, a last little flurry before I head off. So today's fun topic is just going to be, just give you a bit of a glimpse into some of the, the whackadoodleness that I need to deal with from time to time. Overall, there's been a lot less than I was expecting when you step into a pretty public space like YouTube, where, really everybody and anybody has access to, to a PC or phone. And people can jump in with some pretty crazy stuff, and you see that across basically every topic, every channel, every forum, anywhere. And for me, there's been overall, less of that to have to deal with than what I was expecting, but certainly not zero. And I think it's worth sometimes covering some of what comes through. I think most of you will be fairly well, immune to some of what appears on the comments that you would automatically assign it to, well, that's left field. But, some others who haven't really thought a lot in specifically in this space, and just understand some of the basic logics as to why something would work or wouldn't work, or why it's better or not. I think that they are at risk of being swayed by some of the whackadoodle comments and input that can come up. And so, when I see them and when I get time, I do try to deal with them fairly strongly, not to try to change the mind of the whackadoodle that's put the comment up there. It is to just really for others that are reading that comment who may have been swayed, just so that, straight away below that, they have the correction pointing out, the actual basic logic and physics of things, and get them back onto hopefully the correct thinking path. And I'm borrowing the term whackadoodle from the great Dan Cummins of the Time Suck podcast. Again, that's my favorite podcast in the world. If you haven't got onto that, you really should check it out. It might be a bit dark for some. There's a lot of episodes that are fairly dark, just regarding the topics that he covers. But he does a brilliant job at covering all sorts of things out there in the world, and how he thinks and explains things is quite something else. So, it's well worth checking out, but that's where I'm borrowing the term from. If you hadn't heard that one before, I don't think he's trademarked it, so I should be all right. Just quickly, before we delve into the world of potential nut jobs, a little bit of low friction news to cover. First one is, it is CycloWax. So I've had, a bunch of emails over time from people inquiring about CycloWax, obviously mostly from Europe. The CycloWax are based in Belgium, and in Europe it's not always that easy or cheap to get some of the top tested waxes that are obviously made in the United States, because shipping just can kind of kill things. So there is more inquiries about some of the immersive wax options that are based in Europe, and what do we think of those? And so that's where, we do get inquiries with regards to CycloWax. I have been, discussing with them for, pretty much years now. So they started, chats with myself right back when they began. And we did do some initial testing for them back then. And we've been continuing, so we're doing sort of more testing for them now. They have continued to iterate their product over time. And their current version or current generation that's on test now is really, it's a match for any of the top waxes that we've tested so far to date. So once I've finished the full test, we'll obviously do the full detail review. But we can say that we're 2 blocks deep. I won't be able to get the testing finished before I go away. But block 1 done, and block 2, the dry contamination block, done, and we're at 2% wear total at the end of block 2. So that is 2% is extremely close to zero wear, and that's basically a match for any of the top waxes that we've tested to date, such as M-Speed Wax and Hot Melt and Rex and so on. So yeah, for those that are in Europe and are considering a immersive wax that is perhaps a bit more local, then even at this stage, really, we can say that Cycler Wax is a really top option. Not expecting anything to, I guess, go disastrously wrong in block 4. Nothing's going to really change in block 3, because that's just another dry contamination block, and it's already shown that it's amazing, and it doesn't really have any contamination to have to clear out after block 2. So block 4 is going to be, I guess, where the test really starts for a lot of the top immersive waxes. But it is extremely unlikely that things are going to go sideways, and we do have some history of previous tests as well to tell us that things will not go sideways. So yeah, it's all going super, and it's just a great product to be aware of, especially if you're in Europe. This pot and hanger system that you see here as part of their starter kit may look familiar. I think we touched on that a little bit when we covered the launch of the Silka strip chip and their sort of custom pot. That's part of that launch. It would be safe to say that they borrowed pretty heavily from what Cycler Wax rolled out with their starter kit. So yeah, they've done some really great stuff, I think, right from the start. They do have some basically, I guess, race wax tablets, and they have base block tablets as well, which are a little bit cheaper, but we'll go through all the ins and outs when I've completed the full testing and detail review. We'll cover everything. This is just a quick update to say that yes, we've known about it for a long time, been dealing with them for a long time, testing with them previously and also now, and that they really are another top immersive wax option that we can recommend. But if you're in Europe, there are a whole bunch of other immersive wax products out there these days. So quite a few companies have sort of sprung up to jump on the immersive wax train, or sometimes it can be an existing manufacturer adding an immersive wax to their product lineup. And yeah, I just can't work my way through another 50 immersive waxes without, obviously, if the manufacturers are confident that their product is, as they claim, most often the best immersive wax on the market or something very similar to that. At this stage, it is really up to them to either book in or obviously when they're written to ask what they have to substantiate it, to provide something pretty, actually objective. What testing have they done? Robust field testing, other, lab or control testing that, that there are other facilities out there. What have they got that sits behind their claim? Because if it's just basically, which is the usual replies, we worked with a bunch of athletes and teams, and to us it felt like it was the best product. That is the same for literally hundreds of other products where these manufacturers have worked with athletes and teams, and to them it felt like it was the best product. You cannot, obviously that doesn't prove anything. Heavens to Betsy, if that was the sort of the bar to pass to make claims on things, the world would be more of an interesting place than it already is. So yeah, obviously it is up to them to provide something a little better than that initially. If you write to one of the manufacturers and ask them to please back their claims and you do get something substantive, yeah, please loop me in and we'll have a look deeper. But other than that, yeah, obviously I can't recommend what I haven't control tested. So if you're in Europe, so both Cycler Wax and obviously Rex Black Diamond waxes is a couple of really top options known. I know a lot of places in Europe now are, I guess, bringing both M-Speed Wax and Silka across as well. I think a place called Innerspin does M-Speed Wax. I think Midland does Rex. Multiple places have got Silka. So like Starbike, which is a pretty big online store. So yeah, there's plenty of options overall there now. So those brands have been working to obviously get people to be bringing in and retailing their product, as opposed to having to purchase direct from the origin country and have international shipping. So you're not going to be stuck really finding any of the top options, I think, across most of Europe. There might be some places that are still a bit tricky to get without some sort of shipping pain, but it's continually getting better and better across all of those top options. All right, that better do for low friction news, or a run way longer than planned as normal. Yeah, let's have a bit of a look at people who are, I guess, not joining the very obvious big logical dots. Instead, insert a whole bunch of other dots of their own and join them up into some interesting places. Alrighty, first one off is a guy. He's got a pretty big channel. It's called Outdoors 55. It seems to be mostly focused on knife sharpening. And I think he does a really good job in terms of his actual presentation on what he does, because he's got a pretty successful YouTube channel. So YouTube skills he has, which I do not. However, his attacks on zero friction cycling have been a little bit interesting. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Alrighty, so from Outdoors 55 on the video by Silka, just covering the zero friction cycling testing. He states that people need to know there's a significant problem with his wear rate measurement. He's measuring chain wear with lubricants applied as per his testing brief. The measurements should be taken on a completely stripped chain. The problem here is any high viscosity melt in lubricant, like waxing, will give false readings since the wax fills in the gaps between the roller. He even states this on his website in another test file. This is why waxing shows lower wear rates over thinner, wet and dry lubricants, straight from his website. Then shows a little bit of my testing as per my test brief. And so he is not measuring a clean, stripped, dry chain according to his test methods. This is giving a completely inaccurate wear rate than what the chain is actually experiencing. I won't bother reading my reply at the moment because I'll reply better by vid. But he also says, so show your whole test in one video. I'm simply stating that what you say you do on your website. Not sure what that exactly means. I actually posted you exact test method. I don't know what that means either. I would have posted my exact test method to myself. I've written my test method. Can't wait till Hambini comes out with his video. I can't wait either. The reason is because in order to test chains, you have to test power, and currently none of the power meters are accurate enough to do that. If lower wear really equals lower friction, let's run a motorcycle O-ring chain for 12 hours and check the wear. It will be zero wear, but we know it will consume more watts. And goes on about, obviously, all of us sort of inputting in this, I think, are not really to be trusted because we sell stuff. So that's in a nutshell that one. He does state somewhere else here. So if lower wear equals lower friction, how about running a motorcycle O-ring chain? So lower wear doesn't equal less wattage. So let's cover that. Alrighty, so yeah, this is one, I guess, is a great one because I think on the surface that can seem like some, really reasonable questions and not very nut jobby. But the thing with this guy is that at the end of the day, like, he has read the test brief. All of this stuff really is explained. And also we have had in the past quite some detailed emails where I have gone over, this in quite painstaking detail. And, so really, I guess what I'll cover in the next sort of, 5 or so minutes, I think you'll understand extremely clearly. And the fact that, this guy who's supposed to be a bit of a metal expert and has been through the brief and with a lot of interaction is still in this place. This is where he sort of crosses over from being reasonable to more on the, the whackadoodle scale. All right, so to kick off, can immersive wax give you a false low reading or wear rate reading? And yes, it can. And yes, it does have some impact on the check measures, but it is extremely small. And we know how small it is. And Mr. Outdoors 55 makes, I guess, a big hullabaloo about it without actually having any data of his own to back up his side of the story. So, by the time we do a check measure, each treatment has been run for quite some hours at load, so the wax coating is extremely thin. It makes around about a 1%, potential sort of impact to the check wear measure. So if a check wear measures at, say, 8%, if it was stripped clean and retested, it might wear measure maybe 9%. Comparatively, this can occur for obviously wax strip lubricants as well, and it can also occur for wet lubricants. So wet lubricants can be different viscosities, but especially as the test goes deeper and the wet lubricants accumulate a whole bunch of crap that, obviously they're not clearing out the wet lubricants that absorb the contamination from the contamination blocks and become quite abrasive. It's quite clear that contamination has now formed part of that lubricant, and that wet lubricant will be a pretty sort of messy, gunky thing. That is going to have some impact on the check measures, obviously, as well. So it's all still, at the end of the day, very like for like. I would get a slightly different wear measure for pretty much all products if I strip clean them and did the check measures then, as opposed to as is. However, the test, they need to be done as is, because otherwise a whole bunch of other things would screw up the test. For instance, especially for wax strips, most of them have some level, either quite low or quite significant, with regards to potential initial penetration issues. And that has an initial higher wear rate, when the test is kicked off, as opposed to when the lubricant has fully penetrated and is now protecting the pin from wear. So every time a chain would be stripped clean for a check measure, we would have then higher wear reintroduced for any lubricants that have some initial penetration issues. So that would kind of screw up the test. And also the fact that the test is in large part also designed to basically measure how well the lubricant is resisting gathering contamination and able to clear contamination that it has gathered, because cleaning as it lubricates is a major claim for pretty much all drip lubricants. If I'm cleaning the chain at the end of a contamination block, we are unable to assess that. So it's simply explained that obviously, the check measures, it can, for really both wax and for wet lubricants and wax strips, all of them, the fact that there is some level of lubricant inside the chain as well as potentially some level of contamination will give a lower wear measure than if the chain was stripped and check measured then. But there is for certain not enough difference between any of that, for that to be a concern for what we're doing with the test. So, despite the fact that the test is overall, I guess it's deliberately quite a simple, blunt test to keep it, overall very robust. There are variances that form part of any, testing procedure. And we have test variances with the zero friction cycling test that just form part of, the overall test variance. The Tax Neos that are doing the load of 250 watts, they have a plus minus accuracy rating. Oh, that was hard to say, of around, I think theirs is plus minus 1%. There are going to be differences from one chain to another. So chain variance is something that obviously we can't control, and we need a new test chain for each test. So, straight up, we have basically two test variances that are already going to be greater than the approximately sort of 1% check wear measure test variance that we're going to get by measuring the chain as we need to, as is in situ, as opposed to strip cleaning it at the end of each block to do a check measure. Just a quick look at some data. So, in the main test, we check measure at the end of each 1,000 kilometer block, of which, typically the chain will have been run for, intervals of sort of around 11 hours at 250 watts before that check measure. In the single application longevity test, so that is where obviously the lubricant is applied, and then it is run and run and run and run without any reapplication. Or in waxing cases, re-waxing, we are looking to see how long that application lasts. Here's the running sheet for hot melt. So this was just one that sort of showed it up fairly well, in that, initially from the start check measure, we can see that the first, and there are earlier check measures in the single application longevity protocol than the main test, because we're really looking for where the lubricant gives out and has a jump in wear. We can see that basically after 150 kilometers of testing, it's at minus 0.86. So we have a little bit of a negative wear from the baseline start. After 300 kilometers, it is at minus 0.29, and by 450 kilometers, which is about the normal sort of intervals in, say, block 1 of the main test, it is at 1.14%. So we can sort of see at what time and by what amount a wax treatment is, sort of moving from, initially it's going to be slightly under the baseline measure because we have a wax layer there, to showing up with some actual wear. By 900 kilometers of the single application longevity test, it's at 2.86. So, that just sort of gives an indication as to what we're getting from, I guess the impact of the very, very thin wax layer on what a check measure may be, from where it starts off being in the negatives to showing some actual wear on the chain. So now, despite the fact that I have covered all of that like at much greater depth and repeatedly with Mr. Outdoors 55, and he's still typing that sort of stuff, is what's moving him from, what I guess would have been a perfectly reasonable inquiry, I guess, when the first email came through a while ago, to it's on the whackadoodle scale now, because I don't know how clearer I can be on that, and he has absolutely zero. Like, where's his data that shows how much an immersive wax is, I guess, giving an incorrectly false low wear reading after, say, 10 to 12 hours of running and 400 kilometers? I can assure you he has zero. And of course, for just normal real-world practical application, for all of the cyclists out there that need to be tracking their chain wear to know when to replace their chain at 0.5% wear rate, so that they're not starting to eat into their cassette. The instructions, as always, has been to simply check measure your wax chain prior to re-waxing. You will get a very false low wear if you try to check measure a freshly waxed chain, because the rollers are locked tight by wax. But by the time you have done just a ride and broken that wax treatment in, you'll get a very accurate wear check, and especially by the time it is due for a re-wax, you'll get an extremely accurate wear check, basically just as accurately as if you were using a wet or wax drip lubricant. So yeah, it obviously holds no sway, and he knows it. So he's a bit interesting. Right, the next fun part. The whole thing lower wear doesn't mean that it's lower friction. So now again, this is something that I have both covered in detail in the test brief. I've also covered it in my video where I'm demonstrating the actual zero friction cycling test and adding the contamination and so on. And I've obviously covered it in extreme detail with him previously on comments on other videos, and also in our email interactions. So it's exactly the same as it's already out there. Alrighty. So yeah, one of the limitations of the zero friction cycling testing is that if products test with very low wear, I cannot split those products as to which one might be, the more efficient. So, for product A and product B, if they've both got super low wear, I can't tell you if one is, say, 3.5 watts efficiency loss at 250 watts load, or if it's 6 watts loss. We don't have any idea. And that is why, where possible, I've been relying at this stage on Ceramic Speed's Denmark research lab to give me efficiency loss numbers, where possible, even though there's obviously, sort of issues with the fact that we have a player and competitor in the space giving efficiency losses for, competing products to them. But they're just, the only really sort of accurate lab that I've had to sort of reference up to this time. So, that's been upfront and out there since the very beginning. But what we've always also been able to correlate is that if there is, a high degree of wear or notable wear, you just cannot be abrading through the hardened steel parts of your chain at a prodigious rate, in the absence of friction. So, where we have products where, product A has very low wear, especially once we're starting to introduce contamination, and product B has really high wear, we know that wear is, because of the fact that the lubricant has absorbed the abrasive contamination, and it's now merely eating through the chain. And that just flat out takes friction to do so. So the products that remain with very low wear rates, especially in the contamination blocks versus other products, we know that product is, at the end of the day, if it's remaining low friction, it is going comparatively great versus products that are eating through the hardened steel parts of your chain. So again, that has just been covered and covered and covered. the limitations of the zero friction cycling test have been clearly explained in document and video form, and also the benefits of the zero friction cycling test have been covered at the same time. So his use of, say, an O-ring chain for motorcycles as a comparison is just completely invalid. It's a reason why we don't have O-ring chains for bicycles. So the O-rings do eat up a lot of power, which doesn't matter on a motorcycle when you have tens of thousands of watts or hundreds of thousands of watts at your disposal, as opposed to our poor piddly human leg power of 200 to 300 watts normally on average. So, right. Yes, obviously, let's have a look at another comparison. We've got a bearing with time trial grease and a bearing with heavy duty grease. And we had a test period, and both of them basically showed extremely low or zero wear. We're not able to separate which one is the most efficient, and obviously the time trial one would be more efficient than the heavy grease, but it's not showing up on that test. Cool. In cycling, the weight of the lubricants is within a fairly, narrowish band. They are only so thin, or they fly off, and they're only so thick, unless one's adding motor oil or some kind of truck grease to their chain. Commercial bicycle chain lubricants are going to be within a particular band. And so there's going to be various levels of stiction efficiency losses and viscous friction losses, which will vary from one product to another. And they can play a part in the outright efficiency of a bicycle chain lubricant, such that if you have a couple of products that are very similar with regards to their wear rates, there could be 1 or 2 watts difference, at least with regards to their outright efficiency, based on things such as their stiction and viscous friction. And those factors, the zero friction cycling test cannot pick up. And again, I've been explicitly clear about that since the very first test brief. However, where is the dominant friction loss component in the bicycle chain? So the abrasive friction that causes wear of the hardened steel parts of your chain becomes by far the dominant loss component over and above whatever level of stiction and viscous friction we are going to have from those lubricants. So most especially, obviously, when there is very high wear, the friction loss component from that abrasive lubricant causing that wear, that is just the dominant loss factor by many, many factors. So, it is just completely invalid to introduce something like an O-ring chain analogy where the O-rings have a lot of stiction loss. Again, this guy is apparently fairly clever on some fronts. So the fact that he is making such analogies and cross comparisons, again, despite all the interactions that we've had to go over all this already, moving further and further up the whackadoodle scale. All right, finally, just to really ram the bejesus out of this home, let's have a look at a couple of comparisons. So let's have a look at Muck-Off's top line lubricant, Ludicrous AF, at about $100 a 50ml bottle. In Clean Block 1, it had a wear rate of 8.9%, which is pretty low. That's decent. As soon as we've started to add contamination, so through dry contamination block 2, this is not total wear, this is just the wear for that block, 78%. So it has worn through almost the entire chain wear allowance in that 1,000 kilometer block as soon as contamination has been introduced. What has caused the wear rate jump from 8.9% to 78%? Rather obviously, that is due to the fact it has absorbed the contamination that was added throughout that block and become very abrasive. Had I not added contamination in the next block, if block 2 was also a clean block, it would obviously record a wear rate very similar to block 1. Silka Synergy is the lowest wear rate wet lube for block 2 at the moment, so we can see it was 2% wear in block 1. Now I couldn't tell you which was faster out of Synergy or Ludicrous AF due to other factors like stiction and viscous friction, and the wear rate is not enough to separate that. But we can see by block 2, 7.7% wear rate through block 2 versus 78%. So one has still shown very little wear of the chain despite the addition of abrasive contamination, whereas the other has worn the crap out of the chain. and eaten through quite a bit of hardened steel. You tell me which one is lower friction than the other once we have reached that point, and whether or not this test is separating out which lubricant is remaining lower friction in more real-world applications where there is contamination. So one of the strengths of the zero friction cycling test is that it is run over thousands of kilometers and includes contamination, as opposed to clean lab-based tests that run for somewhere between 1 and say 12, 13 hours. That's not super indicative of what is going to happen to most people using the product out in the real world, where they're going to be applying and writing and applying and writing. So, we have some limitations with regards to assessing outright efficiency losses, but the wear rate changes, especially as we move from clean to contamination blocks, tell us quite a lot. I don't know. Again, it's all covered in writing and on video, and he's been over all of that, and he is still in a rather strange place. The mention of the Hambini vid is interesting. I'm not aware that he's going to do one on me. It'll be quite exciting if and when he does. I hope if he does that he actually takes the time to get across, any material that he's looking to cover. I have seen, I couldn't find the video again to pull it up. I don't know what video he commented on, but I had read a comment by Hambini on one saying that he was, I guess, critical of zero friction cycling, saying that I claim to measure power directly, which is impossible. I have no idea why he would have typed that. So, Hambini is not a whackadoodle. He's a very intelligent guy. So I believe that he's just not, been across what we do properly. Otherwise, he wouldn't have typed that, because that's very incorrect. Again, it is fully covered in the test brief, absolutely everything. So we simply use the Tax Neos to provide the load, as they're just a smart trainer with a decent accuracy rating. The variance in accuracy of the Tax Neos, as well as the variance from one chain to another, forms part of just the overall test variance, which again it's all been covered. So I do not claim to measure power directly. We simply set the Tax Neos to please provide 250 watts of resistance load to run the tests. So, yeah, not sure what that's all about, but I'd like to think that obviously somebody like himself, if he was going to do something, he would actually do the research, and he wouldn't then make any silly incorrect statements. Right, now I can, certainly put my hand up and say I have not been 100% correct on a number of things that I've covered in the past. And I think a couple of times I've been, completely outright mistaken. And then, obviously what I do is correct that on the next video. Something that I try to vehemently live by is that you simply want to be incorrect for the least amount of time possible. As soon as you are aware that you are incorrect on something, why on earth would you stay on that position? It really doesn't cost much to just put your hand up and say, yeah, got that wrong, got it now. Here we are, and let's sort of clarify that to the correct position. So, a great example of this, there are endless examples in life and business, but a great example, it would be, say, Shimano and the cranks. Imagine if they had taken that sort of thought train 7 years ago, when they were, I would say, absolutely aware that there was an issue. Had that position been taken then and the problem rectified, they would not have the rolling nightmare that's going to go on for we don't know how many more years now, where they've got around 2.6 million potentially faulty cranks out in the world. So it is just bizarre. It comes back to bite businesses. Again, endless examples to be found. And it comes back to bite people when they are just digging in on a position that they know to be incorrect. And it just, to me, it shows a character weakness and a personality weakness that they need to work on. And that is very much my belief for Mr. Outdoors 55. And I hope one day he actually just has the character backbone to get those little logic dots lined up and not introduce incorrect ones that he likes to join incorrect lines to, and just get on board. So yeah, just to wrap up, Mr. Outdoors 55, it's not that hard. The zero friction cycling test, to understand the strengths and limitations, it's not that hard. This is something that I cover obviously quite a bit with manufacturers, so ones that have used zero friction cycling in the past, using them currently, in discussions with using the testing services in the future. It's something that we go through quite a bit. I like to make sure that any manufacturer who wishes to use the testing is obviously very aware of the strengths and limitations. Most times they will have obviously already read the test brief, seen the video that demonstrates the test. And yeah, it's just, and on top of that, obviously with this guy, I've spent a lot of time answering things very specifically via email as well. So there's really only two options left. He's being deliberately, I guess, combative for reasons of being a fan of some other very bad man, and he's sort of trying to drum up crap because he aligns with him. Or he's unfortunately a bit of a whackadoodle who's apparently super smart with regards to a whole bunch of things, but can't do the equivalent of 1 + 1. So I don't know which one of those two buckets he wants to put himself in, or he could get some character, backbone, and just, again, be incorrect for the least amount of time possible, not the most amount of time possible. All right, sorry, that went about probably 20 minutes longer than I thought it might, but there we go. That's me. I'm going to do one more. This will be a quick one. I did have about 2 or 3 other really fun ones that I was going to do today, but I won't because, yeah, way long. Let's have a look at a fun one that came up on that Cade Media vid. We have Mr. Puppel something. The day I see wax being used as a chain lubricant in industrial applications is the day I will consider it for use on my bike. So that'll be never then. Okay, I won't go through my replies yet, I'll cover it in vid. So the whole point of industrial chain lubrication systems is to reduce wear and maintenance, which is why they don't use wax. So he's saying that do I think that I know more than hundreds of years of industrial science in far more safety critical areas than cycling? Cool story, bro. So he repeats that, and yeah, sort of when I didn't reply immediately thought that I'd run away. So is that a good analogy as to one shouldn't wax their chain because it's not being used in industrial applications? Right, so here's like a freight depot conveyor system. Way back in the day, I used to work for TNT, and let me tell you, when the chains broke on the conveyor system there and screwed up the sorting, especially at end of day processing or start of the day processing, that was one hell of a palaver. Yeah, some of them around the world are no doubt belt drive, but there's going to be a mix of belt and chain. So removing the chain from my bike to pop into a pot of wax for, what is at the end of the day a relatively moderate treatment lifespan in general, that's pretty easy to do. Removing these chains and the downtime that would incur to pop them into a wax and then back on to the system, that may strike you as potentially fairly impractical if someone was to pitch that idea to you. Similarly, popping off a chain like this for a quick re-waxing would be quite a job. There are some different practicalities for industrial applications as opposed to our bicycle drivetrain. Now, if a particular wax gave depending on the loads, was able to give a nice low wear rate for a period of time, any wear rate savings are really not going to offset the downtime and labour that would come into play with removing such chains and re-waxing them, either for something like this or, like we saw before, the freight conveyor or a food processing plant, or removing them from an engine, whatever analogy you would like to think of. There are going to be some fairly distinct limits on, removing a chain to re-wax it in industry versus, running what is just a suitable lubricant for that application, getting the lifespan they can out of the chain before they need to replace the whole kit and caboodle, which is a whole thing. So we might be able to be starting to see and think about some differences between how we use our bicycle chains and chains in industry. Obviously, for one, it is, just a tad little bit easier to pop our bicycle chains off into a pot of wax and then back onto the bike, as opposed to what we may think of and see there. After that, obviously, really the biggest challenge for our bicycle chain and chain lubricant is contamination. It's a tough enough challenge even for just dry road cycling, and it becomes quite an extreme challenge once we head out into gravel and mountain bike and wet conditions. The chain's completely exposed, and all that dust and crap that, becomes part of your chain lubricant, at the end of the day, that lubricant really isn't performing that much like a lubricant anymore. It's starting to become a little bit like a liquid sandpaper. So, the fact that running a solid lubricant is going to have the highest contamination resistance possible, and then every time you re-wax your chain, you're doing a brilliant reset back to nearly zero contamination in your lubricant again when you head back out. It's something that just, adding, say, 3-5 mil of drip lubricant onto your chain over hundreds of links, a typical chain is going to be sort of somewhere between about 100 and 116 links long. Adding 3 to 5 mil across all of that over the top of whatever crap's in there already, it obviously cannot do the same flush clean as swishing it around into a lovely wax bar bath. So there's some, pretty big Captain Obvious differences as to why immersive waxing, at the end of the day, the top waxes just kill the lowest wear rates for, the testing. And I'm, Zero Friction Cycling is not Robinson Crusoe here with regards to seeing the Captain Obviousness of why immersive waxing. For those whom it suits, the rewards that you get for those few minutes of time to do a re-wax are, pretty nice and obvious and real. Now, another key difference for cycling as opposed to industry is the outright efficiency. So this will not matter at all for some who are really only going to care about wear rates. But obviously for the, the racing scene, having the, outright most efficient lubricant on the chain obviously matters. This is pretty much why I think basically every world record attempt and successful world record in cycling in about the last decade has been on a wax chain. There may be the odd exception to that, but they will be few and far between. There are sometimes in world record attempts and also in just obviously world tour cycling and pro cycling where lubricant sponsorship arrangements prevent the athletes from running a wax chain. But there are also many times where even with sponsorship arrangements that do not have an immersive wax, where key riders for key stages are still running wax chains despite that. Now, they are not going to go through that hassle and that sponsor risk if there is not a clear, proven key benefit of doing so. In short, as I sort of was covering with the Whackadoodle section on Outdoors 55, there are differences in things like stiction and viscous friction between drip lubricants, and those differences can literally be multiple watts from one to another, even if the wear rate is the same. With the top immersive waxes, basically once the wax treatment is broken in, you've got a solid super slippery coating on all the parts inside your chain. This solid super slippery coating basically has the lowest stiction and practically zero viscous friction as opposed to obviously liquid lubricants. Now, this may seem fairly minor, but this is the part that does make, some watts difference between, say, a top immersive wax and, I guess, what can be a lot of, drip lubricants. Every time a chain link articulates, you've got 8 separate pieces of sliding surfaces that have to move from static. So you've basically got, you've got 2 inner link plates that are going over the pin. Those inner link plates need to articulate around the pin. Sorry, I can't be bothered this time now getting a diagram up. You have the roller sitting on top of the inner link plate shoulders. So you've got 2 inner link plate shoulders that need to move from static to, articulate inside the roller ball. You've got the side of the roller on the, the left inner link plate. You've got the side of the roller on the right-hand side of the inner link plate. And you've got the inner link plate to outer link plate on both sides of the chain. So in total, you have 8 sliding surfaces in your chain link. Can't get my hands right, whatever, that need to move from static to in motion every single time there is a chain articulation. Pedaling at around sort of 90-95 cadence in most big chain rings, we have around 40,000 articulations a minute. So times that by 8, there are around 300,000 plus separate pieces of sliding surface friction per minute as you are cycling along. So when you take a small number, like a small difference in stiction or viscous friction, and you multiply that small number by 320,000 or 300,000 plus, that multiplies out to a tangible number. And so this is where, I guess the key efficiency differences of the top waxes, they make a difference. And it's different for cycling. If we can save 3 watts here, just in a chain lubricant choice, or it can be quite a lot more at the higher power loads of the professional cyclists. You save 5 watts with something as simple as just running a wax chain as opposed to a drip lubricant chain. That's an easy low-hanging fruit for the pros to go to, and that is why the pros go to them. And that is something, again, that's cycling specific, because we have such limited watts compared to machines, where we can be talking easily hundreds of thousands to millions of watts. We just don't have those watts. So, I guess another analogy in this point would be to say, you know what, I'm not running any bicycle tires that don't have a steel belted radial like we see with all other tires for cars and trucks and forklifts. They may even be on solid tires. It's a nuts comparison. We could have steel belted radials for our bicycle tires, but we're going to lose probably 30 to 50 watts a tire in doing so. A normal car, around 20% of its fuel consumption is literally into the rolling resistance of the tires, because the tire needs to squash for its contact patch, and there's a lot of resistance going on there because we've got steel belts and a whole lot of layers in that tire construction. I don't want you to get punches very often in your tire, and they need to hold up to a lot more load. So, some comparisons are just frankly stupid. I'm not going to run carbon wheels until I see them being run in industry. When I start seeing cars and trucks going around on carbon wheels, that's when I'll get a set for my bike. Where does it end? So, again, I think sometimes, perhaps, if a particular thought train initially might be, you might go, perhaps there's something in that. But then once it's kind of explained to you how really incorrect that thought train or analogy is, if you then stick to that position rather stringently, like Mr. Papa has, again, that's where you move from just having maybe an incorrect thinking moment more into the land of whackadoodle again. Right, that'll do. I did have a few others which would have been great, but I've gone as normal way long. So I'll save those for the future. But yeah, this one, especially guy Larry T Cycle Italia, has given me some of the best material ever to make us all feel a whole lot smarter. So that'll be a good one for sometime later this year. But otherwise, hopefully, if you are able to follow the little logic steps that we outlined today, congratulations, you're in a great place, and hopefully feeling a little bit more clever than a couple of people that are defending some positions to the death that they really probably should move from that position. Sooner would be good for them. Aside from that, other little bits. So I had some great mountain bike races. The last couple before I get to head off, we had a 4-hour XC marathon and also a 6-hour, the Dirty Weekend here in South Australia. Let me tell you, the Zero Friction Cycling Cup between myself and Andrew, that has been pretty hotly contested. At the 4-hour race, I think I finished ahead of Andrew by about, maybe less than half a minute, and I think it was 27 seconds. At the 6-hour Dirty Weekend, I won't state his age, but let's just say he's older than me, and he's extremely impressive, and I would like to be like Andrew when I grow up. So when I get back from America, rather probably a few kilos heavier and very unfit, the next round, I think, is going to tip his way by quite some margin. But yeah, this weekend we've got the downhill kicking off at Fort William. We've got Formula One at Miami, and we have the Giro starting. So there are not going to be enough hours in the weekend to try to get to all that, but I will do my best, as well as I will check into the comments where I can. But yeah, pretty soon I'll be signing off, and I'll be back in about 6 weeks. So till then, have great cycling, stay low friction, stay safe, and I can't wait to catch you on the next one.